Welcome back to Coolly Love Comic Books. For this episode, I want to take a look at Daredevil, Love and War and Elektra Assassin, both by Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. If you watch the Legion video that I did, at the end of that, I get to the point where I find Legion's origin, which is in New Mutants 26, 27, 28, where Bill Sienkiewicz is doing the artwork. And was really blown away by the pages, but also the covers that he did, the range that he had, and the vast different styles of one cover to the next. So it sparked my curiosity. Read that, and then I wanted to find out more about who Bill Sienkiewicz was, what he has done. And now, at least for me, if you type in, Bill Sienkiewicz, I think Marvel in Google, one of the first things that pops up is that he is known for having kind of the definitive version of Electra in Elektra Assassin. And so that got me curious. And if you type in Bill Sienkiewicz Elektra Assassin, or I think even just Bill Sienkiewicz Electra in YouTube, one of the first things that comes up is a video on a channel called VZA, where he is drawing kind of a sketch or a commission of Electra on the inside of a hardcover book, I think, of Elektra Assassin. And it's about 10 minutes long. It's pretty close up. You don't really know what you're looking at for some of it. He's using different media like paint, markers, whiteout. There's a lot going on there. And it's like you're watching somebody work on a puzzle where the pieces are just moving around, but you don't know what the picture is. And then all of a sudden, right at the end, it just all falls into place. And it's just like, whoa, oh my gosh, okay, that's what he was doing this whole time. And it blew me away. And I've watched that video a bunch. I'll put a link to it in the description. And then I will tell you that if you search for, Bill Sienkiewicz interview or Bill Sienkiewicz Electra, there is a ton of, interviews that are done with him on YouTube, and I've watched a bunch of them. So I'm going to put up a couple links in the description to some of the more notable ones. One of my favorite channels currently is Cartoonist Kayfabe, and they did an hour-long interview with him that is phenomenal, where he talks about his career, but Electra as well. There's just so many good interviews with him where he talks about these things. So I sought that out. I started watching these and listening to him talk about the character, the creation of both of these works. And I was hooked, and so I sought them out and I read them. And these are so interesting because there's a story behind the story, which is almost as interesting as what came out, these works that came out. And I became fascinated by that too. So other than looking at these interviews that are kind of more current, I started going back and I read a couple interviews in Amazing Heroes. There's two different interviews specifically. This one here is primarily with Frank Miller, because at the time of this, I think this must have been sometime in like 85 or very early 86, where he's working on three different things at the same time. He's working on Dark Knight Returns, basically Daredevil, Love and War, and then what would become Elektra Assassin. And so they're in this book, or in this interview, he talks kind of about the compare and contrast of what the stories are. And then there's another one, Amazing Heroes, that came out right after the first issue of Elektra Assassin came out, where they kind of talk about where they're going with that one. And it's really interesting to see them talk about how they're kind of trying something different, especially with Elektra Assassin. At one point, Miller says that Elektra Assassin is the most experimental thing he's ever done. The other thing is, you watch all these interviews with Bill Sienkiewicz, and he talks about kind of this concept of jazz and improv. And you'd think with a comic book medium where you have one person that's writing a narrative, and the artist, it's their job to just depict this narrative. Sometimes you have multiple artists working on it. I mean, improv doesn't really even seem possible, but to hear them talk about their process, that's kind of, they were able to achieve something like that. So not only did they kind of move in a completely different direction, kind of blow down some doors to use art in a different way in comics. They also kind of played with some of these concepts of like improv and with the story, which is just really interesting. So for this one, I just want to focus on the Sienkiewicz works. But just from a timeline note, 86 had a ton going on. So the first work that came out was actually Dark Knight Returns. So Dark Knight Returns, the first issue of that came out in March of 86. The next thing out was Daredevil Love and War. That came out in May of 86. A few months later, in August of 86, Elektra Assassin #1 comes out. And then the very next month, just kind of again for context, in September of 86, that's the first issue of The Watchmen by Alan Moore. So all of these works did something for comic books. It kind of moved the needle, changed the direction a little bit. But it's wild that all of those things came out within a few months of each other, and basically a lot of the ones that Frank Miller was working on, he's working on them all at the same time. And two of them are these right here. So to listen to and read the interviews with Miller and Sienkiewicz, when they're working on both of these, the Daredevil is the high priority thing for them to do. Like that's the main thing that Sienkiewicz was hired to work on Miller with, and that it is much more of a traditional, graphic novel or comic book story that you would expect. But at this point, Sienkiewicz has finished work on New Mutants, and he's kind of used those artistic, kind of moved in that artistic direction, and he's kind of moving that forward or continuing that on with what he does in Daredevil. It's definitely stylized. It feels a lot like, especially what he was doing at the end of his New Mutants run. To listen to them talk about it, they say it's kind of like a Kingpin story. Kingpin is probably as much the main character as Daredevil in this story, and this is where Sienkiewicz is starting to use this surrealism, this very stylized, cartoony, exaggerated style. It is with Kingpin. So I mean, he's huge. He's got these wild print vests, and it's to give you an idea of how like forward thinking it was, or how different it was. If you've watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and seen that Kingpin, that is basically a direct homage to the Kingpin in this story. If you would take Kingpin in any of these images and just cut it out and drop it into the Spider-Verse, you probably wouldn't even notice, because I mean it is that faithful a rendition of how Sienkiewicz decided to depict Kingpin in this, and it is a gorgeous story, and it's like some of the nightscapes, the cityscapes are just beautiful. Some of the Daredevil images are just, it's really, really cool. It is very stylized, very different than you would see in a lot of comics at the time. I mean, it was very forward, it was a lot more artistic, and they captured it, and it was very faithful to what he produced. Now, when he talks about this time, Sienkiewicz, for Elektra was not the high priority. It was kind of, calling it a throwaway is probably not fair, but it was not a high priority. Where they kind of had to keep everybody happy, and Marvel was Love and War, it sounds like, and on Elektra they had much more free reign, and they took advantage of every inch of that. If you look at all of these covers that he did for Elektra Assassin, there's eight issues. Again, they're all kind of very different in style, but they're all painted. And in one of the interviews, Sienkiewicz says that he believes that this is one of the first entirely painted comics. And by that I mean he painted the covers, but every page of every comic he painted them instead of, it's not pencil and ink. I mean, he actually painted them, and in fact even used different media in them. And I'll take him at his word. I mean, I don't know that I've seen anything else exactly like this as an entirety, and at least at the time. And it's very modern. Like if you go back and you look at the New Mutants or whatever, any other Marvel comic from around this time, I mean, they're doing kind of 4-color newsprint. It's the detail is there, the art intent is there. The colors are pretty good. Sometimes they drift a little bit. But this Elektra Assassin, every single page, I mean, it's a full color reproduction of what his painted pages were. and it looks like a modern book. You know, I mean, today we take it for granted how many options publishers have to reproduce artwork, but back then, I mean, it was newsprint by and large. You know, a lot. I mean, this is again like right in the era where there's a huge boom in just black and white comics, where you just had black inks and that's it. So like this is kind of forward, and this is kind of modern for the time, and in the story is and how far they push, you know, kind of this cartoony surrealist direction with the artwork is it's wild. It's unique. I think that there's two key pieces to the puzzle here, or one primary one, which is that in the story of Elektra Assassin, you do not have an omniscient narrator. The characters are narrating their own story. So you are introduced, or what you have at a foundation is an unreliable narrator. And so I think what that opened for Sienkiewicz from an artistic standpoint is, well, what if he brought in an unreliable lens? What if he is not going to faithfully just reproduce exactly what's on the page? What if he's going to take an artistic license or direction to, you know, produce, you know, to depict these scenes, or to even like produce a counterpoint to what the narrative is? You know, focus on something that's a minor detail in the story, or give something that's a, you know, a major focal point, just a little bit of attention, or put a different spin on how it's reproduced. And I think that unreliable narrator and the unreliable lens, they fit with the story, and that's what opened the door to make something like Elektra Assassin possible, and how like just interesting, and how just visually, like you're basically reading two stories. You're reading the story that is the words that you're reading, and then the pictures that your eye is seeing, and you're bringing them both together, you're mashing them together, and that's what makes up Elektra Assassin at the end. There's a common theme in a lot of these Bill Sienkiewicz interviews, which is jazz and improv, and it just seems like that would be something that's just not possible with comic books, because you've got, you know, a structure, you have a written story, a writer, you have an artist that's trying to depict that story. I mean, it seems like it's exactly the antithesis of the environment that would sponsor, you know, improvisation and creativity in that way. But to listen to Miller and Sienkiewicz talk about Elektra Assassin, you know, this is the thing that they were doing at night, kind of in their free time or whatever. And, you know, Miller had a story, Sienkiewicz started doing the artwork for it, taking this direction, showing the artwork to Miller, who loved it, and then decided to change or modify or tweak the story to match the images. And there's a back and forth, which is that's your jazz, that's the improv, and that's what comes out of Elektra. There's, you know, the artwork is just such a key piece of the story. That is a big part of what makes Elektra Assassin just so interesting. You can see some of the style starting to come out in Love and War, certainly. But again, it's much more on the rails, traditional story being told by and large. But that's, I mean, Elektra Assassin is just, it's like, okay, you know, go crazy. You know, it's a blank canvas, do whatever you do. And I think he says at some point that the editor said, just as long as it makes sense at the end, that's all that matters. And so they're telling this really wild out there story. There's changes of consciousness. You know, just another quick example that just I thought was really cool, as far as how artwork is critical to the story here. There's a presidential candidate, I think his name's Wind, in Elektra Assassin, and Sienkiewicz found some black and white picture of like a Kennedy-like figure that was just, you know, black and white, and he found two different expressions, and he decided like that's the face of the character, period. So he just made photocopies in different sizes, and just every time you see the character, it's this face or that face, and just different, like it's a copy of a copy of a copy, blown up, shrunk down, whatever, just whatever he needed to put it on the page. But it seems crazy, but you read it, and it fits, it works, and it brings a different detail to that character that's not necessarily written in the page, but the artwork brings that detail to it. I mean, it's just, that's where it's just such a unique read, such a unique story. I'll say that, you know, when they're telling the story, you know, they go back and they kind of do an origin. So issue number 1 of Elektra Assassin is kind of a retelling of Elektra's origin. And just the way that it's done, the way that the artwork changes, the way that the artwork is used to tell the story and the story that is told, all of that put together, I would say at this point, that this is, like, as far as a single issue, like if I had to pick one issue that was my favorite issue that I've ever read, that's my favorite issue, Elektra number 1, Elektra Assassin number 1. It's just so different, and it's so interesting in every way. I just love it. It's just a fascinating book to read. So I would say, if after listening to all of this, if you go out and you seek out one book only, read Elektra Assassin number 1. And if you're going to check anything else out beyond that, hopefully it's the rest of Elektra Assassin or Elektra Assassin and Daredevil of the World. They're both really good stories, really interesting. And again, it's just so fascinating to think that Frank Miller was also working on Dark Knight Returns at the same time. And I just went back to read that, and that was interesting. So I definitely wanted to do a video on that here soon too. Just as a quick footnote to that's blew me away. I found an interview, it was an interview with Bill Sienkiewicz and Klaus Janson. Klaus Janson is the artist that worked with Frank Miller on Daredevil when he created Electra, and he's the artist that Frank Miller worked with on Dark Knight Returns. And there's an interview with Bill Sienkiewicz and Klaus Janson, and it ends up being basically just a conversation between the two of them. And it's really good. It's about a little over an hour long, and it's really interesting to just listen to the two of them talk about their process, talk shop, and what was going on around this time too. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well. So yeah, these are just a fascinating time, fascinating works, and just so crazy to me to think that, like, if you put a pin on the timeline, there's so much going on in 1986 and 87, and all of these works were kind of pivotal points of it, and they're all happening almost at the same time. It's so wild. So yeah, hopefully go out there and check these out, and hopefully you like them. Yeah, definitely, if you can, support your local comic book shop. There's a really good chance that they're going to be able to help you source Elektra Assassin for sure, and probably Daredevil and more. This has been reprinted a bunch of times. They're both readily accessible. So definitely, if you're curious at all after listening to me ramble about all this stuff, check these things out. And in the meantime, I'm going to go off and I'm going to read some more comic books, and you should do that too. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you on the next one.